So before selecting interviews as a research method for your research project, and also to explain why interviews are so popular as a data collection method, we first need to ask ourselves, why interview? Why choose this method and not perhaps lots of other different research methods that are available? And I'm going to share with you 6 common reasons that are cited for why interviews are such a popular data collection method. And the first one is this, and that's that interviews offer us a way of better understanding the lived experience of other people. In other words, how other people perceive and experience the world, and particularly certain phenomena or a phenomenon that we're interested in, which could be, for example, L2 speaking anxiety in the classroom. So exploring how and why people, learners in the TESOL classroom, experience anxiety when speaking in a second language. Perhaps this might include the reflections from participants, why this happens, and what the implications are for how they learn. A second reason is this, is because as researchers, we value the stories of other people. We believe they are of worth in their own right. So interviews as a research method can be presented in the final dissertation report in the form of a narrative, which can essentially tell the story of the participant. And it's a very popular and engaging way of presenting interview findings, one that's widely used. Thirdly, and this is a really important reason why we interview, is because to better understand people's behavior, we need to talk to them to find out how and why they do what they do. So by observing people, for example, in the classroom, observing teaching and learning in the classroom, we can learn about what happens. However, to really truly understand people's motivations or their attitudes or their perspectives that underlie behavior and what they do, we need to talk to them and to find out more through an interview. Fourthly, interviews are a way for researchers to learn more about themselves. They're a reflective data collection technique, one that the researcher plays a pivotal role, and through interviewing we get to learn more about ourselves. For example, about how we influence and manage the direction and flow and content of the interview, how we impact on our participants through our selection of questions, our use of probes, and other even more subtle things like our body language. Fifthly, and this issue is associated with critical or emancipatory research perspectives, and one important reason why we decide to interview participants is advocacy, and particularly to give a voice to interviewees. And this can be, for example, members, minority groups, or members of oppressed groups, in order to provide them with a voice. And finally, the process of interviewing itself, while what can be stressful, is at the end of the day deeply satisfying, particularly when through the course of the interview, as a researcher, you notice that the participant is really truly responding to your research questions, or providing information which you know will contribute to your research question, which can be, is very rewarding. Now, just briefly to contrast the advantages of interviews with, say, other research methods, I've listed some more here that students and other researchers use in projects. And there are a number of reasons why you might choose interviewing over, say, these other methods. Some of them are qualitative, some of them quantitative. For example, observation of participants in their natural settings. This is a qualitative data collection method, and as I mentioned in the previous slide, we can learn about people's behaviors from observing them. We can learn about cultures in particular environments, for example, classroom cultures by observing them. However, to understand the underlying rationale of behaviors and why people do things, interviewing is a really important research method that observation can really only tell us so much. Questionnaires, there is perhaps a degree of overlap between questionnaires featuring open-ended items. So, for example, questions that you might be contained on an interview schedule or list of interview questions could be similar to what's on the questionnaire. However, questionnaires really, the researcher has to pay even more careful attention to the wording, because there is no opportunity usually there's no opportunity for the researcher to clarify the meaning of what they're intending to ask, unless the researcher is present in the room, is available, and is able to raise any particular misunderstanding and clarify it. Obviously, in an interview, the researcher has that option and possibility to clarify and to provide additional explanation where necessary. Concerning measuring how effective an intervention has been, perhaps the introduction of a new teaching method or a new learning technique, this is more of a quantitative data collection method, and this may involve looking at participants speaking or writing, analysing changes in their speaking or writing to draw conclusions about the success of a particular treatment or intervention. And this would be considered quite, if it reveals something quite hard scientific evidence, something that an intervention has been successful. However, it might not tell you why. For example, if learner accuracy has improved after a particular feedback intervention focusing on a grammar structure, then it will only tell you that. Whereas if you added in interviewing, perhaps as a kind of mixed method research, this could provide explanations, very valuable, important explanations that would explain why this particular intervention has been successful. And finally, we can also, it's perhaps not as common as well, it's a less common data collection technique to ask learners to keep, or ask participants rather, to keep a written diary. I think from a practical perspective, it can be valuable, because you may obtain a more continuous stream of information. Perhaps you'll get a little bit often, as opposed to one single interview event, which is naturally more high stakes. However, there can be a number of problems associated with this technique that you would not encounter in interviews. For example, it may be hard to motivate participants to respond by writing diary entries, whereas in an interview, they're likely to want to respond to your questions. Also, people tend to maybe more willing to open up in speaking, in comparison to having to spend a lot of time writing their thoughts. Writing is a process which may require a lot more time from participants to think about what they're going to say, possibly redraft or edit what they're going to say, whereas with an interview, that reformulation is instantaneous and can be done immediately, which is more of an incentive